never visit the Black Forest. I don't even know where to begin. Then again, maybe it doesn't matter, because I doubt any of you will believe me. And judging by how things are going, I probably won't be around to hear your reaction anyway. I'm a travel journalist, currently based in Munich, though originally from the UK. When I first moved to Munich, the plan was just to stay a few months while trying to land some work with European newspapers. But I ended up securing a well-paying journalism position that kept me there for a few years. Eventually, I bought a small studio flat near the city center. I made plenty of German friends, so even though my German was minimal, very basic at best, I never really felt alone or out of place. Now I was used to being sent abroad for assignments, Australia, Japan, Mexico. I thrived on escaping the ordinary rhythm of Europe. So when the editors told me they were keeping me in Germany and just sending me a little to the west, I was honestly disappointed. I asked where I was headed. They said they wanted a piece on the Black Forest, the Schwarzwald. The Black Forest gets its name from the deep, impenetrable darkness created by its towering pine trees. It's a mountainous region in southwestern Germany, stretching westward toward the Rhine River and southward into the foothills of the Alps. It's the country's largest nature preserve. But what my editor was really after wasn't just another scenic travel piece. They wanted a story that captured the eerie mood of the place. The forest is steeped in folklore and ghost stories. It's practically a breeding ground for grim legends. They wanted something gothic and atmospheric to publish in time for Halloween. My initial disappointment began to fade, replaced by curiosity. I've always been a bit of a horror buff, so exploring a famously creepy forest felt right up my alley. As the trip drew near, I became more excited, diving into research on the forest's folklore and the breathtaking landscapes it hides. I was flown into Baden-Baden, one of the region's largest towns. Though my hotel was 5-star, gourmet dining, a pool, a spa, I found I didn't really like the town. It was packed with tourists and felt overly commercial. What I really wanted was to get to the true heart of the Black Forest, untouched and authentic. Next, I rented a car for the 2-hour drive, half my attention on the road, the other half glued to the stunning landscape rolling by outside the window. My destination was the tiny village of Gutak. It was there that I finally experienced what felt like a truly traditional lifestyle, rural, heavily agricultural, almost medieval in character. Located near the very center of the Black Forest, Gutak made me realize how refreshing it was to escape the chaos of the city. Still, a little voice in the back of my mind whispered an unsettling reminder. You're miles from anyone out here. No cell signal, no police, no help if something goes wrong. And of course, something did. The final leg of my trip was a slightly shorter drive to the place I would be staying. Navigating the roads became trickier. They were unpaved, blanketed with thick snow or glazed in ice, and more often than not, ran precariously along steep ravines. For the first 45 minutes or so, I passed the occasional rustic cabin or small cottage nestled in the valleys. Once, I even spotted a sizable ski resort. It amazed me how far some people would go for a little peace and quiet on holiday. Despite its isolation, the area was a popular hiking region, and a few savvy businesses had popped up to serve the steady trickle of tired travelers. Eventually, though, the buildings disappeared entirely. All I saw were trees, massive pines, densely packed and looming in on my car from either side. I quickly understood why it was called the Black Forest. In its thickest areas, the canopy overhead was so dense it created an eerie, premature twilight. That creeping sense of total solitude hit me hard then, but I forced it out of my thoughts. And finally, I arrived. I rounded a bend, and there it was. The cabin stood alone in a wide clearing, surrounded by a pristine blanket of white snow. It looked as if the forest had taken a brief pause in its endless advance, offering a small, peaceful oasis. It was breathtaking. The snow sparkled under the winter sun, and behind the cabin, 3 jagged mountain peaks stretched dramatically across the horizon. The cabin itself was utterly charming, built in the region's traditional style from whole pine logs with 2 floors, a wraparound patio, and a simple thatched roof. I pulled up beside it, parked, and unlocked the front door. Before I even unloaded my luggage, I was darting around the cabin like an excited kid, too eager to explore. The interior was just as lovely as the outside. Hand-carved wooden furniture, a crackling fireplace, and snug little rooms. Downstairs, there was a lounge, a small kitchen, and a supply closet. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a study. The entire place was permeated with the rich, earthy scent of pine. I began unpacking, a process that took several hours. I was planning to stay for 2 months, making supply runs back to Gutak every couple of weeks. I had come fully prepared. Every tool I could possibly need, with a backup for each. I even brought along 2 spare tires, which I managed to wrestle out of the trunk after some effort. By the time I finished, the sun had already started to dip behind the mountains. I didn't intend to jump into work straight away. My plan was to spend the first few days just relaxing and soaking in the atmosphere before writing a single word. With no cell signal and no television, I settled into my first evening the old-fashioned way, reading by firelight. You haven't experienced real darkness until you've spent a night deep in the wild. No street lamps, no nearby houses, just the pale, distant glow of the moon lighting the snowy clearing around the cabin. I drifted off on the couch, gazing out the window at that cold, waxy moon. The next morning I woke up late, around mid-morning. After making breakfast on the gas stove, I layered up in my heavy winter gear. I planned to take a long hike, packed a small lunch, and intended to return before dusk. I'd been warned not to be out after dark, but the moment I stepped outside, I felt something off. There was no birdsong. During my research, I'd learned about many species native to the Black Forest, and yet I heard not even a single chirp. The silence was unnerving. I found myself humming just to push it away. As I crossed the tree line that circled the clearing and headed deeper into the forest, I glanced back. The sun still hung above the horizon, but its light was quickly shrinking, and my tiny cabin stood framed in its golden glow. It wasn't pitch black among the towering pines, but there was a noticeable dimness beneath the canopy. Still, I pressed on with anticipation. I had hoped to spot some wildlife, perhaps a fox, a few deer, maybe even a lynx. Observing the local fauna was a key part of my assignment, but I didn't see a single animal, not even the flutter of a grouse or the scamper of a mouse. There were no insects either, no buzzing flies or chirping crickets. I tried not to let the eerie stillness get to me. After all, I was probably making enough noise to scare off most creatures anyway. The plant life, at least, was spectacular. Bushes dotted with vivid red berries and lush green ferns filled the forest floor, offering a visual feast. I paused for lunch on a fallen log, then resumed my walk. I started checking my watch periodically, and soon found myself doing it more often, measuring the time until I'd need to head back. And it was just as I was turning to retrace my steps that I saw it. Something black, sticking out from a snowdrift on the slope just below me. I pushed forward through the snow, curiosity getting the better of me, carefully navigating the deep, powdery drift so I wouldn't lose my footing. As I drew closer, the shape I'd noticed started to come into focus. It was a pair of hiking boots. That was it. Just 2 adult-sized boots, one left and one right. They stood only a few centimeters apart, perfectly upright, as though someone invisible were still wearing them. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Something about it was deeply wrong. First of all, what kind of hiker would simply leave their boots behind in the snow? I couldn't imagine any realistic situation where someone would willingly abandon their footwear in a place like this. And even if they had a good reason to ditch them, doing so would put them in serious danger, out here in the cold, With only a few hours of daylight left, no boots meant serious risk of frostbite or worse. I tried to think of any logical explanation, but I hadn't seen or heard a single other person all day. And more disturbingly, there were no footprints in the snow except for mine. These boots had clearly been here for at least a day, maybe longer. I forced myself to stay calm, attempting to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they'd been there for weeks or even months. There was no real way to know. And whatever had happened here, it wasn't my responsibility. Shaking off the creeping unease, I turned and made my way back to the cabin. The following morning, I followed the same routine, but chose a new direction for my hike. I wandered through the tall, silent pines once more. Still no signs of life, but I managed to slip into the same serene headspace as before. The forest had a way of wrapping you in quiet. Then it happened again. I stopped in my tracks, blinking, doing a double take. My mind scrambled to process what my eyes had just registered. Another pair of boots. For a brief moment, I thought I must have walked in a loop and returned to the same spot as the day before. The déjà vu was so intense it made my skin crawl. But no, these boots were different. A completely different brand and color. These ones were tucked partially behind a holly bush, barely visible. But like the first pair, they stood upright, spaced just a few centimeters apart, untouched, unexplained. This time, my initial unease turned into genuine confusion. What possible reason could there be for another abandoned pair of hiking boots, just sitting here in the middle of an otherwise deserted forest trail? I didn't feel exactly threatened. Not yet, anyway. Looking back, it seems ridiculous, but I kept walking. That uneasy feeling returned sharply when I discovered the third pair, and it grew stronger when I saw the fourth. But strangely, by the time I encountered the fifth and sixth pairs, my fear began to ease. I started getting used to it. The anxiety dulled. Spotting the boots became almost routine. Sometimes they appeared in clusters, 2 or 3 pairs grouped together, each spaced a few meters apart. In total, I must have found at least 50 pairs scattered across the mountain. Somehow, the sheer number made it easier to accept. It began to feel less sinister, more like some strange, elaborate prank. But the last ones were different. They were the worst. 4 pairs of boots stood beneath a small rocky outcrop, 2 adult-sized and 2 child-sized. The children's boots were tiny, little Wellingtons, barely large enough for a 5-year-old. The moment I saw them, a wave of cold dread swept over me, just like it had the first time. I stood frozen, staring at them as the wind howled around me. I could practically hear it shrieking through the trees, and I shivered as I looked at what felt like a family frozen in place. I tore my eyes away, longing for the warmth of the fireplace, for the safety of my cabin and my book. That's when I saw it. A tree. The largest pine I'd seen anywhere in the Black Forest, which is saying something. It didn't look natural, not in its proportions. Towering, ancient, it resembled a man-made spire more than a tree. For a moment, the unease vanished, replaced by awe. I instinctively raised my camera and snapped a few photos. As I moved closer, the tree loomed over me, colossal and silent. I tilted my head back and my vision was swallowed by a swirling maze of branches above. The bark was gnarled and weather-worn. It was clearly very old. But then I noticed something else. There were markings. Scratches and carvings lined the surface, deliberate ones. I couldn't make out any writing, but the intent was clear. I circled around the trunk and found more. Notches, symbols, crude figures etched into the wood, almost like runes. Then I saw what hung in the branches. Small objects, trinkets, ornaments, dangling high above me, swaying gently in the breeze. They were difficult to make out, but they were definitely man-made. And when I strained to listen, I realized I could hear them, a soft, eerie chiming carried on the wind. It was clear this tree had some cultural or spiritual significance, either to locals or perhaps to the hikers who passed through. It felt like an important landmark, The perfect centerpiece for my article. I snapped several more photos of the tree itself and the strange symbols carved into its bark. Then something else caught my eye. A much larger engraving, words etched deep into the wood, sprawling in bold, deliberate strokes. I could tell immediately it was written in modern German, but my limited knowledge of the language meant I couldn't make sense of it. I photographed the inscription, planning to translate it once I was back online. Der Fleischweber kommt, du kannst ihm nicht entkommen. Der große Schatten kommt, wird dich den Tod betteln lassen. Encircling the writing was a ring of symbols, 3 interlocking triangles, woven together like a knot. I zoomed in on one of them for a clearer shot, making a mental note to research the symbol once I had access to the internet. Then, off to my left, I noticed something else. The ground in front of the tree had ruptured. Gigantic roots had forced their way up through the snow and earth, coiling above the surface. Between these roots were several holes, deep openings in the ground, varying in size from small animal burrows to something the size of a bucket. I wondered if animals had made their homes there, though I doubted it. I hadn't seen a single creature since I'd arrived. Curious, I knelt to inspect each one. Most were empty or shallow, but when I reached the final opening, I froze. This hole was far larger than the others. It looked less like a burrow and more like the mouth of a cave. I couldn't see the bottom, just darkness. Thick, impenetrable darkness. It reminded me of a pot of ink spilled on white paper, the blackness so dense it seemed to leak out across the snow, casting a shadowy aura around it. The longer I stared, the worse I felt. I can't explain it clearly, but that hole unsettled me more than anything I'd encountered so far. More than the silence, more than the missing wildlife, more than the boots. Something about it felt alive. It wasn't just that I was looking into the hole. It felt like the hole was looking back. A strange sensation crept over me, like something deep inside was whispering, calling me downward, inviting me to enter. I turned abruptly and started walking, fast. I didn't stop to look back, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The long walk back to the cabin was laced with unease, my nerves on edge, eyes darting behind me every few minutes, certain I would see something following. But I made it back without incident. I shut the door behind me, locked it, and headed straight for the fireplace, desperate for warmth and comfort. That night I was restless, my mind spinning with everything I'd seen. Even before discovering that hole, the forest had carried an eerie weight, an unsettling presence I had tried to ignore. But I couldn't push it aside anymore. And the boots? I kept thinking about those boots. Dozens of them, scattered like breadcrumbs through the wilderness. I wanted to alert someone, report what I'd found, but without cell service or any police presence for miles, there was nothing I could do. Wasn't it strange? So many abandoned hiking boots, yet not a single hiker in sight. I told myself I'd stay a few more days. The pay from the newspaper was excellent, after all. But if anything else bizarre happened, I was gone. No second thoughts. Something was very, very wrong with this place. At some point during the night, I woke suddenly to the sound of knocking at the door. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just a fragment from a dream. But the knocking came again, steady, deliberate, and a jolt of pure fear surged through me. Who the hell would be knocking on the door of my remote cabin, deep in the most uninhabited part of the Black Forest at 2 a.m.? My breathing quickened. I started to panic. I didn't want to go downstairs, didn't want to see what or who was waiting. But I knew that letting the unknown fester in my imagination would be worse. I had to look. As quietly as I could, I crept over to the bedroom window, which had a view of the front porch. There was a figure. At least it was human, or appeared to be. That alone brought a sliver of relief to my panicked mind. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm the pounding in my chest, and made my way downstairs. Every step felt like it took hours. My vision narrowed as I approached the front door. Tunnel vision. Pure survival instinct. I unlatched the door, but kept the chain on. Something deep inside told me that was important. With trembling hands, I opened the door just a crack and gasped. The first thing I noticed was his size. The man standing outside had to be at least 8, maybe even 9 feet tall. I'd never seen a human so massive. I wasn't sure such a thing was possible. His appearance was just as shocking. His clothes were in tatters, his skin dusted with frost, as though he had walked straight out of a blizzard. But he didn't shiver. He didn't even look cold. He just stood there, silent, unmoved, unbothered, unnatural. His hair was long, falling past his shoulders, black as pitch, matted, greasy, tangled like it hadn't been washed in years. But I've saved the worst for last, his face. It was impossibly pale. Not pale like someone sick or cold, but an unnatural, ghostly white. Against the darkness of his hair, his clothes, and the night itself, it looked almost disembodied, like a floating mask hanging in the air above me. Because of his monstrous height, he had to tilt his head downward just to meet my gaze. And he was smiling. God, that smile. It was warped, almost sleepy, almost vacant. He looked as though he were high or lost in some daze, leering down at me with the vacant joy of a child. But don't misunderstand, it wasn't innocent, not even close. His smile wasn't gentle or goofy or kind. It was the kind of look a toddler might wear while watching a bug crawl across the ground right before he rips it apart with his fingers. Then there were his eyes, glazed, glossy, wandering slightly in their sockets, never quite focused. But it was the color, or rather the absence of color, that really chilled me. They weren't black. They weren't gray. They weren't transparent. They were wrong. A kind of void that language doesn't cover. I can't explain it. Human words weren't made for that kind of thing. All I know is, the longer I looked into those eyes, the more my head started to spin. We stood like that for what felt like forever, though in truth it was probably only seconds. Him towering above me, grinning like something out of a fever dream. Me frozen, chest tight, heart hammering so loudly it drowned out every other sound. He said nothing, not a word, just that smile, that stare. And I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. Then suddenly, instinct took over. I tried to slam the door shut. Bang, his hand shot out, catching the door just before it closed. His expression didn't change. He didn't even flinch. Just calmly, silently pushed it back open a little wider. That's when I saw his hand properly for the first time. Yes, it was large. Of course it was, given his size. But the fingers, they were all wrong. Far too long, each one longer than his own palm, like someone had shaped claws out of skin and bone. The unnatural proportion made my stomach turn. We stood there again, locked in that awful motionless standoff. The wind outside moaned. I could hear my breath, sharp and fast. I could hear his, slow and raspy, like air dragged over rusted metal. And still he stared. That hideous, hollow stare. Why wouldn't he move? But there was one thing I had that he didn't know about. The keys. I always kept them on the table right next to the door. Moving only my arm, careful not to let anything visible betray the action, I began to reach for them, inch by inch, slow as possible. Almost there. Almost. Yes, the cold touch of metal met my fingers. I closed my hand around the keys. Now, just as slowly, I began to retract my arm, moving with the precision of a trapped animal ready to strike. I had one chance. Just one. In a flash, I drove the key straight into his stomach, jamming it with all the force I had. Blood welled instantly, and I stumbled backward, ripping the key free from his flesh. He didn't scream, not a sound, but for the briefest moment, his gaze faltered. His eyes dropped, his hands reflexively clutching the bleeding wound. That split-second opening was all I needed. With a burst of adrenaline, I threw myself at the door, slamming it shut with such force I thought the frame might splinter. My hands fumbled for the lock. I turned it, shoved the bolt across, and collapsed to the floor, shaking violently. I still clutched the bloodied key like a weapon. though it felt pitiful now. I braced for the worst. Any second, I expected to hear the hinges creak, the lock shatter, and see that monstrous grin slip through the gap. But minutes passed. 10, 20, 30. Still nothing. Eventually, I forced myself to crawl to the window. I peeked out, heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear the wind. There he was, across the clearing, walking away, his back to me, melting slowly into the darkness of the woods. I didn't sleep a wink after that. What had once been unsettling had now turned deadly. But even in my fear, I found myself thinking clearly. I've always been that way, not fearless, but able to stay rational when it counts. Yes, I could have packed my things and bolted, but it wasn't that simple. Packing would take time, and there was no way I was driving through those treacherous roads in the dead of night. I wasn't about to leave everything behind either. Call it stupid, call it pride, but I wasn't giving up my gear to that cursed forest. So I made a decision. If I was stuck until morning anyway, I'd use the time wisely. I'd find evidence, something that might make the authorities listen, something to prove that what I'd seen wasn't just panic or hallucination. Deep down, I was certain the man hadn't gone far. I had this gut feeling he was still nearby, somewhere within the trees, lurking. And I couldn't shake the idea that he was connected to the tree and that terrible bottomless hole beneath it. In my luggage, I had packed a small wildlife camera, one of those motion-triggered models used to film animals from a distance. Looking back, I know how risky and reckless my plan was, but I felt like I had to do it. My idea was simple: sneak out, place the camera in the brush around the giant tree, and hope to catch him on film. If I could, maybe I'd have enough proof to get someone, anyone, to come up here and investigate whatever horrors were unfolding in that forest. The best part? The camera didn't need internet. It was designed to sync directly to my laptop via short-range wireless transfer. Once the footage was recorded, I wouldn't even need to retrieve the device. I just had to get it out there. In the utility cupboard, I found a large axe, the kind meant for chopping wood. It was nearly as long as my leg. I had no idea whether it would do much good if I were actually attacked, but just having it in my hands made me feel a little safer. With shaky determination, I stepped out into the snow. The axe was gripped tight in one hand and the wildlife camera tucked securely in the pocket of my winter coat. My first few steps were slow, cautious, every nerve braced for the moment that terrifying figure might burst from the trees. But the longer I walked without incident, the more my confidence returned. I headed in the same direction I'd taken the day before. The snowfall had erased my boot prints, but I still remembered the path to the tree well enough. As I moved deeper into the forest, anxiety crept back in. The pines were thick here, casting shadows, offering far too many hiding places. But I kept telling myself, if he was out there watching me, fine, let him watch, as long as he stayed hidden. If I so much as heard the snap of a twig, let alone saw that man again, I would bolt straight back to the cabin and forget the whole thing. When I finally reached the tree, I couldn't stop a quiet sigh of relief from escaping my lips. But the moment was fleeting. The heavy, eerie atmosphere returned immediately. The silence here wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. I crouched down and nestled the camera among the ferns, making sure it was well concealed. It had a clear view of the gaping hole at the tree's base. I switched it on and set it to record. Its battery could last 3 days nonstop. That was all I needed. Job done, I turned back, eager to return. My pace quickened with each step, heart racing faster the closer I got to the safety of the cabin. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. At first, my brain didn't register what it was, but as I turned my head, the bottom dropped out of my stomach. It was him, that nightmare face. He was peeking at me from behind a tree trunk, half concealed, just watching. He wasn't trying very hard to stay hidden. I could see that awful grin spread across his face, the same cold, hollow leer as before. If anything, it felt like he wanted me to see him. My instinct screamed, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't stop. I didn't run. I kept walking. Same pace, same direction, every muscle in my body straining to stay composed. I felt like prey, like a gazelle caught in the lion's line of sight. If I ran, he would give chase. Another half-kilometer passed. I heard nothing behind me. Only then did I let go of the breath I'd been holding. Then I caught sight of him again, just at the edge of my vision. This time, he was crouched behind a boulder. It was absurd. That enormous body trying to hide? It looked comical, impossible. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me so quickly and without making a sound. Yet, somehow, there he was. I could feel his eyes on me again. That same haunting gaze locked on me with a sick kind of glee, watching to see if I'd flinch. And I was filled with a wave of pure despair. There was no one to help me, no one to hear me scream, no one who would ever find my body. I didn't see him again after that, but I knew he was still watching. He was playing with me, enjoying the fear, savoring my helplessness. The moment I made it back to the clearing, I rushed inside and slammed the door shut. I locked it tight and collapsed to the floor, sobbing like a child. Whatever courage I'd managed to gather earlier had completely vanished. I was broken. And yet, somewhere in that fear, I felt a flash of searing rage. How dare he? How dare this twisted, monstrous freak do this to me? The rest of the day I spent packing. I moved quickly, methodically, making sure everything was ready for me to leave the next morning. As night fell, I closed every curtain, blocked the doors with bookshelves, and kept the axe beside me. That night, I drifted into a feverish, fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of towering black-haired figures with grinning, childlike faces. When I woke up and realized I had made it through the night undisturbed, I nearly cried with relief. Without even dressing, I ran downstairs to check the footage. I powered on the laptop, remotely stopped the recording, and switched to full-screen playback. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I knew there would be something. The footage started with me, nervous, tense, placing the camera. I saw myself hurry off screen. Then came daylight. I fast-forwarded through it. As night fell, the camera flipped to night vision, painting the pines in that eerie green hue. I bumped the playback speed to 5 times normal, eyes scanning every inch of the frame, but always flicking back to that dark, gaping hole in the ground. Then, wait. There. I rewound a few seconds, finger trembling slightly on the touchpad. There, a hand. I slowed the video down frame by frame just to be sure. My heart climbed into my throat. Yes, a hand reaching, emerging. A hand emerged from the darkness, gripping the edge of the hole. I braced myself. I knew now this was going to be a horrifying ride. Another hand appeared, clutching beside the first. Then slowly a head rose into view, a face I knew far too well. He pulled himself out of the hole, pausing as if to sniff the cold night air. Though he was alone, that dopey-ass half-lidded grin still played on his lips, like he was in some twisted trance. Then he stood up, rising to his full, unnatural height. Without warning, he bounded out of frame, fast, jarringly fast. I had to skip forward through the footage again. At one point, deep in the background between clustered trees, I thought I saw something impossibly large moving across the screen, slow and deliberate. But I chalked it up to video distortion, some artifact in the footage. With nothing else happening and daylight approaching, I assumed the rest was uneventful. I was just about to turn the video off. I screamed. The man's face dropped into frame, upside down from above the camera. It filled the entire screen, his grotesque features twisted in that now familiar, nauseating grin. Those eyes, inhuman, depthless, locked with mine through the screen, dragging me in, smothering me in terror. I slammed the laptop shut. For a second, all I could see was my own reflection in the black screen. I jumped again. Then, a cold calmness settled over me. I think my mind simply reached its limit. It shut down, decided there was no more room for fear. Mechanically, I stood up, got dressed, grabbed my packed suitcases, and carried them out to the car. I slid into the driver's seat, inserted the key, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. I started to roll forward, and then it sputtered. Died. I leapt out, nearly hysterical, cursing loudly, shouting desperate prayers to any god that might be listening. I just wanted out. I just wanted to escape. The back tires were slashed, clean, deep cuts, sabotage. For a moment, I almost gave in. I nearly collapsed in the snow, ready to accept whatever fate this cursed place had planned for me. Then I remembered. The spares. I had 2 extra tires in the trunk. My anguish turned to euphoria. I was swearing with joy now, laughing, shouting as I dragged the spares out like they were holy relics. It took 4 hours, made slower by the thick snowfall that had begun, but I got the new tires on. By the time I finished, it was nearly 6 p.m. Dusk was falling fast, shadows crawling across the sky. I didn't care. I would have driven into a ravine before I spent another minute in that place. I floored it, skidding and slipping over the ice-covered dirt road, tearing down the mountain like a man possessed. In the rearview mirror, I watched the cabin grow smaller and smaller until it was swallowed entirely by the trees. And for the first time in days, I felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. After half an hour of driving, night had fallen completely. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead, scanning the edges of the headlights for any sign of movement, any looming figure. The axe sat beside me on the passenger seat. The windows were up, the doors locked. Inside the car, hurtling down the winding mountain road, I felt as safe as I could possibly feel under the circumstances. Wherever that man was, there was no way he could keep pace with the reckless speed I was going. I was putting real distance between myself and whatever horror I had just fled. Another half hour passed. I began to hope I might see the first flicker of civilization, maybe a cabin with its porch light on, or if I was lucky, that ski resort I'd spotted on the way up the mountain. Then, from the trees on my left, something enormous burst out, too fast for me to react. It slammed into the side of the car with devastating force. Everything flipped. The world spun. I felt myself lift from the seat, weightless in a swirling storm of glass and steel. The sky and forest merged into a sickening blur. Then crack. Everything went black. When I came to, I was still surrounded by darkness. The car's interior lights were out, and my vision throbbed with pain. My skull felt like it was splintering in two, but slowly through the haze, I became aware of my surroundings. I was upside down. The rearview mirror was below me, and snow was piling through the shattered windows. The windshield had caved inward, bent and fractured from some massive impact. I was suspended in the air, held only by the seatbelt digging into my shoulder. My eyes flicked to the axe. It was inches from my face, buried blade first into the passenger seat. A little closer, and it would have been me. Adrenaline surged through me. I snapped into survival mode. With careful movements, I unlatched the seatbelt and lowered myself onto the roof of the car, now the floor. My body ached, cut and bruised all over, but nothing felt broken. I was lucky. Unbelievably lucky. If I'd had a broken leg or a fractured spine, I'd already be dead, alone, bleeding out, buried in cold. My thoughts immediately turned to the crash. I remembered the blur, something huge flying out of the trees. Could it have been him? That didn't make sense. He was tall, yes, terrifying, but he wasn't big enough to flip a moving car. Still, I knew I couldn't waste time trying to figure it out. That wasn't my priority anymore. I had to get out of the forest, and fast. I had no shelter, no food. I left all of it at the cabin, assuming I wouldn't need it. If I stayed here, I'd freeze to death or starve within days. I pulled the road map from the glove compartment, fumbling for my compass. With a little effort, I managed to get my bearings. I had a rough idea of which direction I needed to walk, and so I set off. I laid my coat across the shards of glass on the car floor, creating a makeshift barrier, and carefully crawled through the shattered window, managing to avoid cutting myself. I left nearly everything behind in the wreck. Only the barest essentials came with me. Yes, even the axe. It felt like dead weight now. The journey was slow, grueling. My only light came from the dim beam of a wind-up torch, and I had to pause every few minutes to check my map, making sure I was still headed in the right direction. I walked for what must have been hours. I never stopped, just kept moving, one shaky foot in front of the other. Eventually, as exhaustion and cold crept in, I abandoned even the map. It no longer mattered. I just walked. That was all I could do. Walk. Keep walking. More than once, I felt myself nodding off on my feet. My eyelids drifted shut, and I had to physically jolt myself awake. I knew if I sat down, if I let myself rest, I wouldn't get back up. Then, out of nowhere, I heard something. A sound. It's hard to explain how deeply it shocked me. You have to remember, I hadn't heard a single noise beyond those I made myself in days. The Black Forest had become a place of absolute crushing silence, so to hear something, anything, meant something had changed. Something was wrong. I spun around, alert, heart pounding. Every hair on my neck stood up. There it was again, the sound of footsteps, leaves crunching beneath something heavy. Strangely, the figure, the man, wasn't my first concern. As horrifying as he was, he had always moved in silence. Whatever this was, it was loud, deliberate. Still, terror surged through me. The steps were slow, circling, like whatever was out there was studying me. And it sounded big, heavy. I began backing away slowly, my limbs barely responding, as though my body was on the edge of shutting down from fear. Now, I've spoken a lot about fear throughout this story, and many of you might think you understand what I mean. You think of fear as seeing a dark shape in the corner of your room, only to realize it's a pile of clothes. You think of the spider in the shower, or the unease of being alone with a stranger on a train. But that's not the kind of fear I'm talking about. You don't know this kind of fear. The fear I felt in the Black Forest was something else entirely. Consuming, suffocating, alive. It clung to me like plastic stretched over my face, cutting off my air. It electrified every nerve in my body, made my skin crawl, set my bones vibrating with panic. It was fear that seeped into my gut like poison, that curdled and festered, that made every breath burn. A fear that silenced every other sense, blinding, deafening, numbing, until there was nothing left of me but terror. You don't know that kind of fear. But I do. I took about 10 steps backward, then stopped abruptly as my back slammed into a tree. My eyes stayed fixed on the darkness ahead, my torch darting wildly across the shadows like a panicked animal, erratic, desperate, unfocused. Some distant part of my mind might have registered that the tree behind me felt unusually narrow, but I was too focused, too overwhelmed to process it fully. What I did notice, what I'll never forget, is when the tree moved. Slowly I turned. Somehow, deep inside, I already knew that what I was about to see would change everything I thought I understood about the world. We live our whole lives consumed by human concerns, human hopes, human fears. Our problems are shaped by the world we know. We fear violence, illness, failure. We hope for love, success, peace. But those fears and hopes are shallow. They belong to our species, our tiny, narrow slice of existence. Our minds aren't built to grasp what lies beyond, the things in the twilight, the others who walk unseen. I turned my gaze upward. Far above, something moved in the canopy, something impossibly tall. And then I saw it, that pale white circle, that face, the same horrible grinning face, descending slowly through the branches. I stumbled back, fell hard to the ground. My torch dropped. I was frozen, powerless. All I could do was watch. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, as if to show me what it really was. If the figure had been tall before, it now towered over me like a skyscraper. But the change wasn't uniform. From the waist up, it still looked vaguely human, still wore that expression, that childlike smile, still had those lifeless, all-consuming eyes. But its legs were wrong. They were impossibly long, at least 40 feet, grotesquely stretched like they'd been pulled apart on a torture device. They didn't match the rest of its body. It looked like someone had taken a normal man and perched him atop stilts made of bone and muscle. It rose to its full height, straightening from the low crouch it had been in. From where I lay, I had to tilt my head almost straight back just to glimpse its face. It loomed so far above, I couldn't believe it was real. The legs terminated in grotesque, twisted feet, but everything in between was a nightmare. Tendons twisting under taut skin, muscle flexing and squirming as though barely contained. They didn't move like human legs. They pulsed, convulsed. Each step it took was unnervingly exaggerated, cartoonish, but in a way that made my skin crawl. It would lift a knee high into the air, swing its arms in rhythm like a marionette pulled by some monstrous hand. I couldn't breathe. My chest heaved, gasping, choking on my own fear. Then it began to lower itself again, far too low. It crouched deeper than any human body could manage. I heard bones crack, pop, shift. Its legs bent at the knees, then again at a second unnatural joint. They arched upwards, contorting into twin bows that flanked either side of its torso. Like a spider with 2 legs, and it was coming closer. I turned and vomited into the snow beside me. With the creature now crouched in its grotesque spider-like form, the height difference between us had narrowed. We were nearly eye to eye, and now I could take in its full, hideous form. The remnants of what had once been trousers hung in tatters around its grotesquely elongated legs. Its greasy black hair whipped like the mane of some wild beast, the howling winter wind sending it streaming across its shoulders and down its spine. The face, the awful, unchanged face, still wore that same dopey vacant grin, the same glassy, hypnotic eyes. But as I watched, the grin began to widen and widen and widen. Not in any natural way. Its jaw didn't drop like a snake's. There was no anatomical adaptation to justify the change. The corners of its mouth simply stretched, skin pulling taut, then tearing, ripping. Red muscle and sinew split open, spraying blood and ribbons across its pale face and the snow below. If someone had seen it from the side, I imagine it would have looked like a mutilated version of Pac-Man, only infinitely worse. As its cheeks split and peeled away, the shredded flaps of flesh exposed a massive slack jaw that dropped all the way to its neck. I saw its tongue, or rather tongues, 4 or 5 of them entwined and twitching like a nest of snakes. They writhed and quivered in the frigid air, tasting it, tasting me. But what haunts me most, what I still can't shake, was the teeth. They were still human, rectangular, familiar, wrong. At this point, to try and describe my fear would be futile, a cliché, useless. I stared at it. It panted heavily, drool spilling from its mangled maw, chest heaving. And in those terrible eyes, I saw something unmistakable. Excitement, the thrill of the hunt. And then it screamed. It shrieked, sounding its hunting cry like a trumpet blast from some hellish underworld. The noise tore through the forest like a blade. I clamped my hands over my ears, not out of fear, but because the pain was unbearable. It was a sound beyond description, a mixture of a human wail of agony, a bird's jagged screech, and something else entirely. Something ancient, something wrong. It faded off into a rasping croak, then silence. That was when I ran. I didn't think, I didn't plan. I just ran, straight through thickets of thorns, smashing my way through the underbrush, slamming into low-hanging branches. I leapt over a ledge without hesitation, landing hard, feeling my ankle twist. But I didn't stop. I didn't even feel it. The pain meant nothing. My body had switched into something primal, something ancient, something designed to survive. It was the pure, blind instinct of a creature being chased by something that should not exist. I wasn't breathing. I didn't need to. My legs moved like they weren't mine, like something had taken over, like my DNA had reached back to the dawn of time and flipped a switch labeled escape. I glanced over my shoulder. It was coming. Head whipped back in the wind. its mouth still hanging open, as if laughing. That monstrous spider form gave it unnatural speed. It skittered over the terrain effortlessly, limbs moving in jerky, horrific rhythm. Its long torso leaned forward, and those freakishly long fingers reached out, grasping at the air, reaching for me, ready to snatch me up, to tear me apart, to feed. I felt the thunderous impact as it landed. The ground trembled beneath me, and a wave of snow exploded into the air. I looked back and saw it, its monstrous feet planted on the trunks of two trees, nearly 40 feet apart. It wasn't running anymore. It was swinging. Using those grotesquely long legs like arms, it launched itself from tree to tree, suspending its body in midair like a grotesque, oversized acrobat. Each jump came with a blast of snow and a cracking echo through the forest. I poured everything I had into running, more than I thought I had left. The thought of being plucked from the ground, ripped upward into that writhing mouth, was unbearable. But my body, for all its desperation, was still human. I began to slow. My legs faltered, my chest burned. Bile crept up my throat. I stumbled more often, and each time it took longer to get back up. I could feel the thing's foul breath at my back, hot, sour, and thick like rot. In my mind, I could already see its tongues curling around my neck. Then, on a desperate instinct, I dove left. I rolled hard down a slope, tumbling through brush and snow. A moment later, I heard it, a sickening crunch as the creature smashed headfirst into a pine tree, unable to stop in time. I was on my feet instantly, adrenaline giving me a second wind, a burst of energy from my tiny head start. But I knew, even then, I wouldn't outrun it forever. Sooner or later, it would catch up. And when it did, I didn't pray for escape anymore. I wasn't that naive. I prayed that when the tearing and screaming and agony ended, I'd be allowed to rest. Then in the distance, I saw it. A shape. Black, sharp-edged, outlined by moonlight. A vehicle. I didn't dare believe it at first. I couldn't. I was terrified of hope, of having it yanked away like a cruel joke. But it was unmistakable. A car. The driver's side door open. I didn't think. I launched myself toward it, slammed the door shut behind me, heart slamming in my chest. And somehow, miraculously, the key was already in the ignition. I froze for half a second, then whispered a thank you to the unseen soul who, in all likelihood, had died to leave this escape route behind. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear stick forward and floored the accelerator just as the creature's massive bulk came crashing down behind me. The tires skidded, fishtailing wildly as I tried to gain control. I spun, swerved, fighting to find my grip on the snowy forest floor. Then I broke free, shot forward, gaining speed. I couldn't push the car to its limit. There were too many trees to navigate, but I drove as fast as the terrain would allow, swerving around obstacles that leapt from the dark into my headlights. And in the rearview mirror, I saw it rise, standing once more, towering, those massive legs striding effortlessly through the snow, still keeping pace. My heart soared as the tires bumped onto a rough dirt road. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe, maybe, just maybe, I was going to make it out alive. On the more even terrain, I slammed the pedal down, switching to full speed. The sudden surge of power threw me back into my seat as the vehicle rocketed forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature still moving, upright, striding, but now beginning to fall behind. It never ran, not once. It just walked, that same grotesquely exaggerated stride, leisurely, as if time was no concern to it. Like a cartoon figure twisted by nightmare logic, its movements were uncanny, too smooth, too exaggerated. Its shadow stretched behind me in the moonlight, long, thin, and unnatural, the silhouette of a man on stilts. Then slowly, those towering 40-foot legs began to vanish into the darkness. The last thing I saw in the mirror was that face, that chilling, too-wide smile, that gaze fixed, dizzying, hungry. It didn't frown, it didn't scream, it just watched, as if it were saying goodbye. I reached Gutak in the early morning, just as the first streaks of sunlight crept across the sky. I didn't stop for anything but food. The locals asked questions, but I ignored them. I devoured the meal they generously offered and left without another word. I drove on, recklessly fast, uncaring. I never wanted to see another pine tree again. When I reached Baden-Baden, I left the car behind. I couldn't keep driving around in a dead man's vehicle. I was sure of it now, that someone else had been in that forest before me and they hadn't made it out. The dark, crusted blood on the dashboard had confirmed as much. Even now, I think about that poor soul, who they were, what they saw, how they died. Still half dazed, I booked a flight back to Munich. I ignored the calls from my editor after they learned I had returned early. I never answered. I never would. I never took my evidence to the police, partly because I knew they wouldn't believe me, partly because I couldn't bear the idea of them understanding. When I got back to Munich, nothing was the same. I quit my job. I told no one what had happened. I asked a friend to translate the writing carved into that tree. The flesh weaver comes, you cannot outrun him. The great shadow is coming, he will make you beg for death. I also researched the symbol I'd seen, the 3 interlocking triangles. It's called the Valknut, an ancient Germanic symbol. It represents the realm of the dead. It's been a month. I don't go outside anymore. My apartment's a mess. I hardly eat. I don't sleep. Because every night I have the same dream. I'm standing on some nondescript road in some forgotten place, and it's walking, always walking toward me, getting closer, its smile never faltering, its eyes glowing, and then it's so close that it fills my vision. Nothing but that face, that grin. And I wake up, but even then I feel it. Still out there, still walking, still searching. It won't stop. So now maybe you're wondering, why am I telling you all this? I wouldn't have, I wasn't going to. But the past 2 nights, I've noticed something strange. Handprints on my windows, knocks on the glass. A pale face at the edge of my vision, gone when I turn to look. I might have dismissed it as a prank, neighborhood kids, a stalker, a home invader, if it weren't for one thing. My apartment is 40 feet off the ground.